Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. If you're a parent with very young children, you already know how hard it is to find childcare at a price that is reasonable. What may be more difficult is finding childcare that is clean, safe, properly licensed, and of course fits the needs of your child. Well, joining me tonight to discuss this is Christina Eaglin, author of the new book, Who's Watching My Baby? A Complete Guide to Competent Childcare. Christina, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here, Harold.
So let me drop a couple of numbers on you first. Now, according to a 2023 U.S. Census report, most parents, regardless of their children's ages, say they did not have any kind of child care arrangement at all, including 35% of those with children under the age of 5, and more than half, 54%, with children ages 5 to 11. That was surprising to me that so many parents with young children don't have childcare. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's scary. It's an epidemic and it's not going away. And, this book it's my love letter to parents. It took 20 years to write 21 chapters. And it's all about, what childcare is best for you, how to choose that childcare. Once you choose it, then, what to look for, what not to look for. It's what we don't know. So like there's what to expect when you're expecting. Everybody knows that. I have a
Right,
30-year-old kid.
exactly.
Like I had that book when I was pregnant. There is no book out there about what to expect with your childcare and daycare. And so what I sought to do as a single mom, I literally went through every single kind of childcare there was. And so whether it was in-home, out-of-home, licensed, unlicensed, an au pair, a nanny, and the book is really unique, and it's what I would have wanted in my 20s when I had my kids, to know exactly what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. It has interview guides, it has like tools, research. It's all research based as well. And that's kind of like why I did this book, because nobody's got this. And every time I talk to some women about it, it's like, girl, I wish I would have had that when my kids were, when I was looking for childcare. Because some people may think, oh, well, daycare center is for me, but actually maybe an in-home shared nanny might be for them. And so what I do is in each chapter, I talk about the different kinds, the pros and cons. I also go back and I talk about my personal story with that particular type. And then delving even deeper, I get from the child care provider's perspective, whether that be the nanny, the au pair, the daycare center executive director. Like, when's the best time to talk to these people? How do you talk to these people? Questionnaires, what to ask these people, what you don't know, you should be asking them. And then from their perspective, what they want you to know that, they like and what they don't like, what their pet peeves are, and how you can, be the superstar parent as well. So it's a love story. It's my love story to all parents out there seeking childcare right now. And it's a great, like a baby shower gift, even a wedding gift if somebody's like so inclined. Yeah. But it's just something that I didn't have. I had what to expect when you're expecting every single month, but I didn't have anything to help me. I literally was just calling people, pounding the pavement, trying to find childcare for my kids. And it was crazy. It was crazy time for me.
So, and one of the things I did want to ask, okay, both of your children are adults, young adults now.
Yeah.
Why bother with this issue now? I would imagine that most parents, particularly mothers, whether they were partnered or single, look, once they got out of the child care stage and on to being, the kind of semi-independent post-pubescent. I mean, most people don't think about daycare or child care anymore. Why write this 20 years later?
This book has been written over 20 years. I've picked it up, I've put it down, I've picked it up, I've put it down. It's like God would not let me leave this earth without getting this book out of me to help parents. I mean, I literally feel like it's a calling. I have, many times like, maybe like you said, my kids are older. But then I'm like, wait
it's
a minute.
over.
Right.
It's
Well,
done.
what did I go through, Harold? I went through hell, and it was crazy. Like how to hire, how to fire with dignity. I mean, there's so many different things to this whole childcare that they don't tell you about.
I get that.
Yeah.
But again, short of conversations with other fathers that, in my case, for example, with I've always dealt with stages of what is age appropriate. I guess I kind of never looked back at that, and so that's why what I was asking, because as you said, if you went through hell, why put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and reignite the hell?
Well, exactly, because it was traumatic, and it was also really good. Like some of our caregivers, we're still best friends with them as of today. So it wasn't all bad, but the reason is to help other moms and help other dads and help other parents, not to have to go through what I went through. So, it just this book would not let go of me. It just would not let go of me. So, I got it out. I got it published. It's right here. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's a gift. Like I said, it's my gift to parents, because it's very difficult. Not only getting childcare. Okay, Harold, let's talk about this. So we're just talking about getting childcare, but you have to retain that childcare. And then things happen, like, childcare people might graduate, they might move, something might have a life event, and then you have to get childcare again. And so, this is like what you don't know about childcare, and how to make the best of it so that it's good for your kids. There's even a chapter from my children as to how all these different types of childcare impacted them as young adults now. They wrote a chapter in there as well, which I really like that, because it's a holistic perspective. It's from the provider, it's from the end user, it's from me. So people are getting a rounded opinion. They're not just getting one side, which, some people have little chapters about childcare in their books, but there's no one book dedicated. Trust me, I've looked for it.
Right. So in the title, you say a complete guide to competent childcare. I think just about anyone knows what incompetent childcare looks like, because for those parents who have some sort of childcare incompetent obviously means that there are problems. But how do you define competent childcare, and is there a scale regarding minimal competency versus top tier? And let's just talk. Let's talk about, because I do want to get to the whole nanny thing, au pair thing later.
Sure.
But I want to talk about what would be considered probably most common, which is the daycare center.
Okay. So daycare center, let's talk about that. The daycare centers, there's lots of things to look at. Right now, daycare centers aren't what they were when my children were in them. They're really little mini educational places now, and they have like curriculum, and they have state guided measurements that they have to take the children through. And if they don't have that, if they're not licensed, they won't have that, or they may have that. But again, the book shows you, like, this is what those things are. This is what you should expect. This is what competency looks like. I mean, incompetence obviously looks like your kid sitting on the side of the road and everybody shut down the daycare center, and they're gone, which, joke not joking, that does happen, and it's tragic, and of course those stories end up in the news. But competency is, can I trust this person? Because your child is like your DNA. I mean, you are entrusting this human that you've created into the hands of another human that you don't know. And you only have a few minutes, a few hours to understand who that person is in an interview. So you have to ask the right questions. You have to go around with my little checklist, and you have to look at the exits, and you have to look in those corners for this, that, and the other. Are they using gloves when they change diapers? I went into an in-home place and I asked the lady if she used gloves when she changed the children's diapers. She was watching 4 infants. She said, "Do you use gloves?" I said, "I'm not changing 4 infants. You are." But she wasn't. And she would just change the kids on the floor, on the couch, wherever. Like, that's not where I want to put my child. And so there's things that we don't know because nobody just gave us a super pill to say, okay, this is what daycare looks like in this situation. And so it's about being astute and knowing what to look for, knowing the questions to ask. Like, are there any adults in the home? If this is a daycare center inside of a home, okay, are there adults in the home? Are there kids in the home? Will those kids be interacting with my children? The adults that are in the home, are they in the sexual, offense register? I mean, you have to know this. And, we give all those tools and things like that so that you can look these types of things up. But you can't just place your child blindly, which is what we've been doing for decades, into a situation, and what I was doing. And so you asked me why, after I've got, 30 years later, why am I still beating this drum? It's because I want to help those moms and dads and parents, to not have to go through what I went through, because childcare is something, like death and taxes. It's not going away.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said to this childcare provider, "Do you use gloves when changing diapers?" The fact that her reaction was not a yes or no, "Why do you ask?" but it was, "Do you use gloves?" The attitude probably would have been enough for me, and specifically in that case, after that conversation, was that something that she considered, or was she just completely against it?
I didn't care if she considered
At
it,
that point,
Harold.
yeah, you didn't care.
I didn't care. Okay. Changing stations need to have spray bleach. They need to have gloves. They need to have wipes. Each child has to have their own diapers. I mean, there are things you have to know, and have to do. You can't just be throwing your people's children on your couch and your floors, and these people are getting a great deal of, affordable daycare, at this woman's house. But I think if they knew what was happening, they would be outraged. They would be absolutely outraged.
Yeah, that, like I said, that anecdote was really kind of surprising to me, and very, very important. Before I take a break, I've got about another minute. Um, and this, I think, is so important. We hear the biggest complaint is the waiting list, because there's such a lack of available daycare, not
Yeah.
affordable, but how long should you expect to be on a waiting list? And is there a strategy for addressing waiting lists? Should you try different waiting lists? Should you pay to be on a waiting list? Do you need to slip the executive director a couple of extra bucks? Because parents can be extremely desperate. I want you to think about all of those questions, Christina, because I'm going to take a very, very short break.
Sounds
When
good.
we come back, we will talk more about who's watching my baby. We're talking about finding childcare. So stay with us. The Daily Drum will continue on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. The Original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next. That's on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM Channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we are talking about childcare, how to find competent childcare, how to find affordable childcare, how to make sure that the childcare that you find is safe, that's clean, that is licensed, and fits the needs of your child. My guest is Christina Eagland. She is author of the new book, Who's Watching My Baby? A Complete Guide to Competent Childcare. So before the break, I was asking you about waiting lists. And as I said, so many people hear about the horrors of the waiting list. Talk to me about that.
Oh, the waiting list is real. It's in the book. I mean, at who'swatchingmybaby.com, it's all over there. When you get pregnant is when you need to start looking for childcare. And I know
Really?
that sounds crazy, but it's so true. And then you can't, first of all, you need to figure out what type of childcare is going to work for you. You may already have a child. So if you already have a child that's not in elementary school yet, do you really want to be paying 2 daycare bills, or is it time, because one is pre-verbal, that you can bring it home, maybe nanny share, have a nanny, have an au pair, something like that. So you have to figure out what kind of childcare you want to have. And
how do you do that? How do you, especially for brand new expectant parents, who don't, who don't know anything about children.
Correct. So each chapter has each type of solution and pros and cons. So it's up to the reader to decide, okay, here, I'm laying out the case for you. Here's the pros, here's the cons of this. Here's the pros, here's the cons of this. Based on what I've said, what works best for your family. Everything's not going to be a one size fits all for people. But
so give me an example, if you can, of what, for example, if I'm an expected parent, I laugh at that, just having that come out of my mouth.
Okay, let's say you're having your first baby. Okay.
Yes. And it's a girl.
And it's a girl. Congratulations. Much easier than guys. Anyway, in that case, I would not recommend an at-home solution. Why? Because that child is pre-verbal. That child cannot communicate to you what's happening. However, if you find a really good daycare center, either licensed or unlicensed, and just because a daycare center isn't licensed doesn't make it a bad daycare center. As you'll see, like I had some of my best experiences in unlicensed daycare centers. But in a licensed daycare center, you have people round the clock watching that child with you. It's not just a one-on-one. You have an infant room where people should have shoe covers on, and it's very sanitary. And if somebody gets sick, everything doesn't stop because there's other workers there that can fill in. So in that case, if I'm pregnant, I've got a girl coming on the way, I'm going to go and I'm going to look at least 5 daycare centers. And then I'm going to ask for contracts of at least 3 of those, because those contracts are lengthy and those contracts have a lot of information that people just sign away and they don't realize what's in it. And we get into that in Who's Watching My Baby as well. And so when you have those contracts ahead of time, when you go and you do your on-site visits and you take my checklist and you go through the on-site visits and look at all the things I say to look at, and you ask the executive director of those centers the questions I ask you to ask them, that's going to make your decision pretty darn easy. And so in that case, okay, so I just got pregnant. Now I've got 40 weeks to go. It may be a little too early to like sign a contract. But honestly, Harold, some people are signing contracts before they birth their babies because the lists are so long. Some people are even paying weekly daycare before they even have a baby, just to hold that spot because it's so scarce to get really competent daycare.
So when you're talking about signing a contract, and I'm sure we could have a completely different conversation about that. But just what are the things that will be beneficial to the parent that should be in that contract, including, can I get out of it if I need to? Is that, tell me about these contracts again. This is something that I've just never heard of.
Yeah,
I thought that the kids kind of, you have the
just dump them off, right?
You drop them off, and you love the place, but then you get a job and you have to leave town, and your child has been there for a year and a half, and you've got a, I don't know, a 2-year contract, for example, uh, just for the sake of conversation. If I have 6 months left in that contract and I've got to take a job in New York, does that mean that I have to pay the rest of the contract, or can I just leave?
Well, I am not an attorney, so I'm going to just put that
Right.
out there right there. But the contracts, to my understanding, and from what I signed when I signed those contracts, they're not that legally binding. Of course,
Okay.
life happens. Of course, things like that. But what you want to look for in the contract, what are the hours of operation? How often do they change the access code on the front door? Who can pick my children up? Who will you give my children to? Will you give my children to somebody who just rolls up in there and says, I told you to pick them up? Or is there an approved list? Is there a password that, this person has to give you to take my child out of your custody? What are your late fees? If I'm 1 minute late, am I going to get dinged? If I'm 15 minutes late, am I going to get dinged? Do you take vacation, whether this is licensed or unlicensed? Is it a paid vacation? So, I mean, all these things are, and I'm kind of mixing nannies and
Sure.
daycares at that point, but even with a daycare center, they do have staff that go on vacation. Well, who comes in when that staff's out? Or does the staff just backfill that position? You want to know everybody who is engaging with your child. It is life or death in some instances. And so it's just critical to just be all up in that daycare center, or licensed or unlicensed, all about the nanny, all about the au pair, all about, sharing families. Some nannies, will share a family and go back and forth to different houses, or au pairs. I mean, you have to know. Knowledge is just key in daycare.
So if you roll up to the daycare that's down the street
Yep.
because you're looking, when you walk in, because I would imagine, and again, this is something I don't know, that's why we're having these conversations.
Correct.
um Walking into a daycare may not necessarily be like walking into a doctor's office, where there is a front office and a receptionist and glass, and that you open the door and there's just a big room,
Yep. Yep.
and the executive director or the owner is sitting and reading to the children, and then you've got some other daycare assistants, teachers, what have you, whatever those titles are, with the children on the playground, the older children in the backyard, and if it's a home place or if it's just a standalone building, whatever.
Correct.
So, and we are talking about children, very, very young children, and they may be running around screaming, doing whatever. Children are chaos, and sometimes that's healthy. But what is it that you should really look for when you walk in the room or into a daycare center, even before you have that conversation about
Okay.
applying?
First of all, do not roll up on any daycare center. It is
Okay.
watchingmybaby.com. I say, do not do that. Call them. Would you like somebody to just roll up on your show, while you and I are having this interview and say, hey, Harold,
Right. Yeah.
it's
But
just a courtesy.
but that's
Make
but
that appointment.
yeah. But still, I mean, but that's what most people do. They go knock on the door.
Exactly, because they don't have the instruction. And that's what I'm trying to do, is provide people with that guidance and that instruction so that they're well received when they do get there. Because what you want to do is you want to have an appointment. What you want to do is have at least a 30-minute appointment so the person knows you're serious, to say, I want to come in. I'd like to ask you some questions. I'd like a tour. I'm due in November. I'm open to, putting a deposit out, or, finding out about your wait list, things like that. And so when you get there, there's a whole list. I'm not going to crack it open and read it to you, but there is a whole list of things to look for just in the physical plant alone. Okay, of what could be hazardous, what could be, okay, what could be acceptable. And then even looking at the other kids, Harold, okay? Are the kids healthy? Do they have snotty noses? Is somebody attending to that kid who just sneezed? And if they did they wipe the nose and keep going, or did they wipe the nose and wash their hands and then keep going? I mean, these are things that, it's not only about your kid getting sick, but if your kid gets sick at daycare, guess who's next? And guess who's missing work?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about price. And I think this is one of the most stressful things for parents, short of actually finding daycare. What is considered affordable? How much? Parents often complain about just how expensive daycare is, which is why those statistics that I read at the top of the program suggest that many of them don't have it because they can't afford it.
There's a nanny on TikTok. I wish I could remember her name right now, but she is a hoot. Like, she will show these ads from parents who want to pay $10 an hour to have somebody come in their house for like 50 hours a week, and just do a whole bunch of stuff. And so you get what you pay for in daycare. And, if you take nothing away from this interview, you get what you pay for in daycare. And it's imperative to have the right daycare that's going to fit your parents or fit your family's needs. And it's imperative to have the daycare that's going to work for your budget, right? So like mentioned earlier, like if you have a kid who's 4 and now you're about to have another kid, does it make sense to have 2 daycare bills? Or is it now time, because one of those kids is verbal and can talk, to bring it home and get a nanny for half the cost? And then you can get, an au pair for even less, because an au pair stands for on par. And it's really like having a daughter, an older daughter in the home to help you with your daycare. And they're trained and they're wonderful. And I've had a great experience, and I've had a horrific experience with au pairs. But there are all kinds of price points for different people. The one thing that's not a negotiable is there is no free daycare unless you've got a sweetheart deal with your spouse or your partner or your parent or your auntie or your sister.
Or your job, if your job happens to have it.
If your job, yeah. But that, for us it's mere rare. Mortals, that ain't happening, right?
Right.
So that's not going to happen. So you need to figure out, and that's why I take a lot of time in the beginning of Who's Watching My Baby. At the beginning of the book, I really take a lot of time with the pros and cons of each one and what to expect from each one of those solutions. Because there's cheaper solutions and there's more expensive solutions. But what's going to work for you is not going to work for me or work for the next person. So it's really an individualized choice.
So I remember a conversation I had about this topic much, much earlier this year, where the average price of daycare in the state of Maryland is $27,000 a year. Virginia, significantly less. I think the number was around 18,000. Let's, for the sake of this discussion, let us assume in Maryland the $27,000 per year cost. Can you get a nanny for that kind of money?
I'm not going to say you can, and I'm not going to say you can't, because
that was a pregnant pause right there.
That was, yeah. I had to think about that one, right? Could you? I don't know. That's not a lot of money to work with. But maybe if she's a live-in nanny, or he is a live-in nanny, and you're supplying medical care, and you're supplying a car, and you're supplying gas, and you're supplying food, and you're supplying shelter, then yes, maybe that could work for you. Okay. And that's why I'm saying there's so many different ways that you can take this thing. But for the most part, try living off of $27K a year. I mean, that used to be great money back in the 70s, but like, we're not in the 70s anymore, Harold.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And so you get what you pay for. You don't want to have somebody who, and then we also talk about, if you get somebody who's, with papers or a green card or not green card or immigrating, and how you can help if you want to do that, like that's all in there as well. But, you don't want to get somebody who's coming, from a country who, isn't making any money, and then they see 27,000 as a lot, but they don't honestly know that that's not a lot of money in our country. It's just
Yeah.
not fair to that person, and
What's
you have to be fair.
what is the difference between a nanny and an au pair?
So a nanny, she can live, I'm just going to say she, but nannies can also be
Yeah.
male. But she can live in or she can live out of your home. And so what's really nice about a nanny is you don't have to pack the diaper bags and the food and the clothes and everything. You can just like get up, go to work, come home. And the nanny's got your back. Like she's at the house, she's got the kids. She either lives at your home or she lives at your home part-time and she goes to her home on the weekends, that kind of thing. And there's nanny shares, where families can rotate the nanny throughout different homes. And there's those kind of things. So she's like a paid worker. An au pair, again, means on par. My French is horrible, but I do know. Au pair is on par. And that means on par as a member of the family. You are expected to take her on vacations with you. When the family goes out to dinner, you are expected to take her out to the family dinner. She is a member of that family. You're also expected, nanny, live-in, or au pair, au pairs do live in, is to respect their privacy and space too. And so this is part of what I told you about from the perspective of the daycare giver. Au pairs love the children, nannies love the children, but they need a break. And so if the family, mom and dad come home and they're off the clock, because there is a work agreement, we have the whole work agreement in who'swatchingmybaby.com, like everything you need to know so that there are no misunderstandings, everybody knows. But let's say mom and dad come home, they're kicking it with martinis on the deck, and the kids go back and start playing with the nanny. She's off the clock. It's not fair to have her watching your children when she needs a little bit of a break. We all need a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
And so it talks about that and equity with that. But that is basically the difference. The au pair is really a member of the family. The nanny is considered a worker. Now, having said that, I never had worker nannies. All my nannies were considered members of my family, and they still are. And I am in touch with, I would say, 80% of them. We are still really, really good friends. And I never saw them as a salaried worker. But definition wise, that is the difference. You're not expected to take a nanny out to dinner. You're not expected to take her on your family vacations or anything like that. But an au pair, she's your older daughter. She absolutely has got to have all the rights of a family member on par.
Yeah. I want to go back to the daycare center thing, because in the search for a competent daycare, how do you find information about a specific daycare, whether there were issues with a particular center? Where do you go?
So there's one thing now that wasn't around when I started this adventure with this book, and that is the internet and Google ratings.
Right.
So, you have that as a resource. I also have some links in the book as far as, seeing if people's license is up to date and if it's paid by state. So it's not just the DMV, but it's, for the whole United States. So you have to do your due diligence. Also, the best thing to do is to talk to parents that are already in that daycare to see, what obstacles have you come across? If you had a bad issue, how did you resolve it? Was it resolved amicably? It must have been, because you're still here, or do you not have any other choices? And you need to know that information too, right? And the other benefit of knowing parents at a daycare is if you're late to get your kid, you can say, hey, Harold, can you pick Emily up because I'm running 10 minutes late, and just hold her in your car with your kid and I'll be right there, and then you can do the same back for me, and we can save each other that late fee as well.
Yeah,
So,
that late fee
it's real.
it is not just real, it's fodder for comedy and everything else. I've heard a lot of stand-up comedians even talking about the horrible forbidden hand to the back of the hand to the forehead late
Yes.
fee. How much are we is $1 per minute? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, and now I've heard $5 a minute. And let me tell you,
Oh my goodness, $5 a minute?
They are not playing. They are not playing. One time I was running late and they're like, Miss Eaglin, we are closing up. You have got to be here. I literally sent an ex-boyfriend to get my kids. And I said, I love him to death. And today, you know,
yeah, I was going to say, I hope that relationship was ended amicably.
It did. It absolutely did. It absolutely did. He had like a 2 and a 4-year-old swirling around his Jeep and, you know, in the parking lot while he waited for me to come get the kids. And they're just thinking they were having the best time. And he's like looking like he's just stunned. He's like in stun mode with all the energy. But yeah, you got to have, and then you have to have backups. Like there's a whole chapter on backups and backups to backups and backups to backups to backups.
Meaning, you know? And when you say backups, you mean someone who can back you up in the event of an emergency.
Yes. And then can back them up and can back them up. Yes.
There has to be, I mean, one would think that daycare center owners are not like Darth Vader. I mean, if you're in a car accident and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you end up being, let's say you go to the hospital or something and you know, you fully recover, you're okay. It was just a fender bender, and they had to stick a Band-Aid on your forehead and you're fine. But if your phone is destroyed, if you can't call, you know, I wouldn't expect, you know, like the next day or something for them to say, well, you owe us $150 because you were just a no-show and your mom or your best friend showed up to. There's got to be some sense of understanding.
Well, yes, and that's where that contract comes in, right? Because on that contract, you want to know who has authority to pick my child up. Is there a password for it? And in that event, like you would send one of your proxies to go get your kids that was already pre-authorized to pick your child up. And so you wouldn't have, you know, hours and hours of things. But let's say an in-home daycare. Let's say it's more relaxed than an institutional daycare. You know, it's in somebody's home and it's the end of the day and you're running late. A lot of times they're not going to charge you late. They'll just be like, okay, just get here safely, you know, and they'll be fine with it because maybe they have older kids and their kids are now playing with your kids. And it's like a love fest, which, you know, was with Marianne actually. You know, and so it really depends on the type of setting and what setting works best for your family.
Mm-hmm. So is there, and this is another really difficult thing. It's hard enough to find, as you say, competent, affordable daycare. But what if your child has special needs, even if those special needs are not where the child is incapacitated, but but perhaps they have a physical disability?
100%, Harold. I'm so glad you brought that up. We addressed that as well. There weren't before. And that's kind of the other thing that's really cool about this book evolving over decades is because things have changed, right? So like when I started this book, there were no medical daycares ever. And so now there are medical daycares. And so I speak to that and how to find medical daycares and how to see if you qualify. And a lot of states will even pay for it. But not all states, unfortunately, are doing it at this time. But there are a good amount who are. And what's beautiful about that is you have nurses on staff. You know, you have people that can administer the IVs or administer the medications or whatever that child may need that a regular daycare could not do. It used to be, and in my interview that's in the book, the executive director of the daycare center said, yeah, we have to turn people away if we can't, you know, accommodate the needs. And it's really a shame because the parents really need us, but we can't accommodate because of the child's medical condition. but it's beautiful when, you're able to get the assistance, and you can have somebody who's medically qualified to administer exactly what that child needs throughout the day when you cannot be with them. And that's all you want, is for somebody to be able to be there for that child, keep them safe, keep them alive, keep them stimulated, keep them clean if possible, but not always. And that's a whole nother thing. Let your kids get messy. It's okay. It won't kill them.
Mhm.
But medical daycare is a thing that's on the rise right now. And I think especially given the cases of autism in our country and things
Yeah.
like that, that it's really, really important to do that, to have that kind of support for our children. And now we do have that, where before we didn't.
How much education should a parent expect the staff to have for a daycare center?
So for a licensed daycare center, there actually are qualifications and different types of education levels. I can't recall them right now, but I
Mhm.
wrote about them, and what the staff, like the director I had, she had a master's degree.
Okay.
And her staff was educated, and they take so many hours every, I think every 6 months, so many hours of continuing educational credit for these kids, because daycares used to be drop and go. Okay.
Right.
And now they're not. They're little mini organizations of education, and they have curriculum, and they have, goals. Even the infant, I'm like, how can you have a curriculum for infants? And they're like, oh, we do. We have gross motor skills and minor motor skills. And can they turn around or turn over? Like, there's a thing. And so the other thing, talking about daycare centers, I know we're really talking about that a lot,
Mhm.
but one thing that I think is really cool is there are apps now. And these apps, the daycare providers can send you pictures all day long about your kids. Like when my kids were
Wow.
there was a little notebook called My Day, and it would show how many wet diapers, how many soiled diapers, how many ounces they drank, what did they do, they went to the park. Now this app, the providers can just tap, 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 send you pictures. Some daycare centers have cams, live cams. You can go
Mhm.
straight on into tunnel right on in there and see what's happening with your child. That's fabulous. Okay. Because again, transparency and seeing that that child is safe and happy and being supported when you can't be there is that's the golden ticket.
Yeah, and I would imagine that that would give parents a sense of comfort, knowing
100%.
that throughout the day that the child is safe and is indeed not just being monitored, but also learning right as they begin to think about the transition from daycare to early childhood education, preschool, kindergarten, etc., etc. Christina
100%.
Eagland, thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, talking about this book, and hopefully it can help some young parents. I'm glad that that stage of my life is well over.
Me too, Harold. Me
Yes,
too.
indeed. I tell you.
But if they
But
want more info, they can go to who'swatchingmybaby.com. The book is also on Amazon. And they can see, the endorsements. It's been endorsed by Dr. Gerald Renzi, who's an OBGYN, Dr. Victoria Harley, who is a psychologist. It talks about the benefits and things like that. So if they want more information about it, please shoot them a link.
all right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, July 16th. I'm Harold Fisher.